this postmodern milieu. There is no absolute truth. There is no transcendent truth. You have your truth, and that's your truth. And you can have your truth, and that's your truth. And there was no like some sort of transcendent point or some kind of Archimedean point where you could stand over and ultimately judge which one is right and which one is wrong. The only problem is your truth might say something totally opposite to somebody else's truth. But still, am I thinking it was still truth? It was your truth or so on. And this is pretty much the way I was raised, the way I was educated, and the way I fervently and passionately believed. Now, I was always, even when I was young, I was always somewhat of a seeker. And I can remember, it was in the mid-1970s, I was a student here. I was sitting in a pizza parlor right off of University Avenue. I think now Chipotle. That's where Chipotle is. Either it's the Chipotle or that copy place right there. But it was an Italian, it was a pizza joint. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in this pizza parlor. I was eating a pizza, probably drinking a beer, and I was reading a philosopher. And he said something in that pizza parlor that right then and there changed my life in an instant. And what he said was something to the effect of, in order to live the most perfect life upon the earth, you needed to find out the reason why you were here and then live your life accordingly. Well, for some reason, those words were like a prefrontal lobe lobotomy. I mean, they just went right in and zoom, in an instant, just wiped out this whole philosophical relativism that I had been raised on. I was maybe 21 years old. Because it suddenly hit me. I'm sitting at the table, and there's a pizza sitting on the table. Now, somebody might have thought that aliens flew down in a flying saucer and put the pizza there. Somebody might have believed the pizza evolved out of the ground. Somebody might have thought the god Marduk created the pizza. There could have been 1,000 different people with 1,000 different views on how the pizza got there. They could have started religions based on their view of how the pizza got there. They could have worshipped the pizza. They could have died for the pizza. They could have murdered for the pizza. You could have had 1,000, you could have had 100,000 people, all with their own views about how the pizza got there. And maybe every view was wrong. Maybe nobody had a clue on how the pizza got there. But it did take away from the fact that there was the pizza sitting on the table. And it just hit me, somewhere out there in the universe, somewhere, there had to have been an explanation for the pizza. Something had to say, maybe nobody could ever know what it was, maybe nobody ever would know. But something had to explain that pizza. And then it just hit me, right at that moment. I mean, I exist. There's something here. There's the pizza parlor. There's the world. There's the unit. There is a reality out there. Now, I get it filtered, and all that. I don't see it for actually what it is. That's all fine. But it just suddenly hit me in the same way that there had to have been an explanation for that pizza. How it got there, why it was there, the purpose of the pizza, and on and on and on. It just hit me in the same way. Somewhere out there, there is this universe, there is this existence. Somewhere out there, there has to be something that explains how it got here, why it got here, the purpose of it, and so on. And that would be the truth about the universe. And I can't tell you what an earth-shattering moment that was for me. Because suddenly it just hit me, wow, that truth had to exist. And up until, a absolute truth. And up until that point, it was it was all relative, all and so on. And I'll never forget, I mean, this was 1976, I think, or 77. And I walked out of that pizza parlor, and I remember I just walked up University. I probably was walking back to the library. And I'm walking through the streets, and I'll never forget this. I'm walking through, and I just felt this. I felt it so strong, it was almost painful. I thought to myself, if it were humanly possible, because I realized that my sudden realization that truth had to exist. Okay, just as there had to be an explanation for the pizza, there had to be an explanation for the universe. Okay, that was absolutely, utterly incontestable in my mind now. But what I realized, the fact that I knew that there had to be a truth didn't automatically mean that I myself or anybody could ever know it. One didn't automatically follow from the other. So I realized, even though I knew that truth had to exist, I realized that there's absolutely no reason that I should automatically be able to know it. But I was 20. How often do you remember your moments of feelings that far? But I'm walking through the streets of Gainesville. It's so weird because I've been telling this story all over the world for 30-some years, and now I'm in Gainesville telling it. So I'm walking through right up University, and I feel it so strong, it's almost a pain. I'm thinking to myself, if it were humanly possible, because I realized it might not be possible to know, but I thought, if I could know this truth, how did I get here? Why are we here? What is the purpose of life? Just these basic questions. I remember thinking to myself, I wanted to know it. I didn't care where it led me, what it cost me, what I had to suffer, what I had to give up. I thought, if I could know it, I wanted to know it no matter what. And all I know is, not 3 years later, I went through my phases. I don't know, you had every religious group in the world here. I mean, I hung out with the Moonies and the Hare Krishna. I used to hang out with Hare Krishna. I went through a Marxist thing for a while and so on. But all the different paths, all the different ways I ended up becoming a believer in Jesus. Now, it was remarkable, because there was really one kind of group of people in my life I hated. And I hated Christianity. And I hated Christians. Because even though I wasn't raised in a religious home, I was raised very much where I was a Jew. And I was so bitter over all the persecution done in the name of Jesus to Jews through the century. The Crusaders rolled into Jerusalem, rounded up the Jews, and put them in a synagogue and burned it to the ground, while the Christians sang hymns to Jesus, and all the persecution through the centuries. I remember reading a story about how on Christmas Eve, these SS guards just stuffed a trainload of Jews off to Auschwitz. The SS guards were drinking schnapps and singing, Silent Night, Holy Night, and the tears dripping down their cheeks as, on the way to, killing, as we just murdering these Jews. So I was bitter against Christianity. And I used to vent my anger out on the Plaza of the Americas, on Jed Smock. Do you know Jed? Does he still come? I mean, this was 35 years. Jed would be out there, and he'd draw a crowd of students around him. And he, if you know Jed's style, nobody can imitate, follow Jed. And he's sitting there, he's preaching hellfire and brimstone. And I used to get in the center of the circle next to Jed. And I wasn't content to stay in the crowd. And I could have gotten arrested for the things I did to this guy. And if he damned my soul to hell once, he damned my soul to hell 1,000 times. I mean, he swore. He was charismatic, and Jed used to put his hands on my head and speak in tongues and cast demons at me. And I start drooling, and I try to turn my head around, and I writhe on the ground and all that. I mean, it was a show. I mean, my friends eventually nicknamed me Heckle. I'd be in a bar somewhere, and someone would come up to me and just shake my hand and say, hey, I think you're hilarious out there with the preacher and so on. And this went on for a couple of years till I graduated the University of Florida. And it was in the late 1970s, and at that time of my life, I had one goal. I was in the creative writing program. And I had one goal in my life. I was going to be a novelist or nothing. I've got novelists and writers and editors in my family that go back some generations. I mean, my uncle was a well-known experimental novelist in New York. And I had started a novel my senior year here. And before long, the book consumed me. All I cared about was writing the novel. And I was an English major and all that, and my parents, sacrificed to get me to school. So I had to get my, I wanted to get my degree. I wanted to get my degree out of the way. But outside of a few poetry classes I took, I didn't really think it was much of a help to me. All that mattered was my novel. But anyway, I graduated. I had worked on my novel for a year. And then I'd go home to Miami Beach, because that's where I grew up. I grew up in Miami Beach. And I went back home, and I'm working on the novel a little while, and I decided, I don't want to stay here. I'm going to work on the novel overseas. I want to go work on the novel in Europe, because part of the novel took place. And I had been to Europe numerous times. When I was 17, when I graduated high school, I saved up my money and just kind of bummed around Europe and North Africa on my own for a while. Then when I was 19, after I finished 2 years of college, I took off for a year and just worked my way around the world. Just, you can travel incredibly cheap if you don't care where you sleep and what you eat, And so part of my novel took place overseas, and I was going to go back and work on it over there. So anyway, I end up leaving Miami Beach, and I go over to Europe, and I'm hitchhiking around England, trying to get settled somewhere. And it's kind of funny, at one point, I ended up in a Catholic monastery on an island off the coast of Wales. And I was there for about 3 days, and the monks threw me off the island. I'm not going to give you details. So I got kicked off the island, and I'm hitchhiking around England. And then I decided, I'm going to go to Sweden and work on my novel in Sweden, because I had once lived in Sweden. And I was fairly fluent in the language, and I had friends. So I was going to go to Sweden. So I hitchhiked to the British coast. And then I take a boat from England to Holland. And then when I get to Holland, I'm just going to hitchhike up to Sweden. Well, the whole time I was hitching in England, it rained on me. And if you get to Holland, it rains more in Holland than it does in England. And I'm walking down the gangplank of the boat, and it's cold and it's windy. And as I'm walking down, I got a backpack, and there's a guy ahead of me who's got a backpack. And on the back of his backpack, he has a sign that says Greece. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to Sweden? It snows in Sweden. And so on. So I walk up to this guy. Suddenly I see the backpack, the sign for Greece. And I get this idea in my head. So I walk up to this guy. Say, hey man, are you hitching to Greece? And he says, yeah. And I say, what a coincidence. So am I. Let's hitchhike to Greece together. And just like that, I changed my mind. So with this guy, we start hitching to Greece. Well, 2 guys in the rain with backpacks. We're not getting anywhere. So finally I said, hey man, I'm just going to go on my own. So I split up on my own, and it took me 4 long, hard, hot days. I think I practically walked through communist Yugoslavia. But I get to Athens. It's about 4 days. And I had a friend who I had met in the campus here who lived in Athens, and he had given me his address. So I go through the town, and I finally find this little house in the city, and I knock on the door, and this little old lady comes out. And I say, Faunus, is Faunus here? And she says, Faunus no here, Faunus in Miami. So I sort of let out a wail. I mean, and a woman, she felt sorry for me, so she gave me a meal. So an hour later, I'm back out in the streets of Athens. I have no idea where I'm going to go. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I mean, I just sort of kind of bummed out there a little. And, my biggest problem was, where was I going to sleep that night? Much less, what was I going to do for the rest of my life? So finally, I just found some bushes along the wall. And I laid out my sleeping bag in the bushes, and I went to sleep. As I said, you can travel cheap if you don't care where you sleep. So this was some bushes along a wall in some street in Athens.